when you suddenly realise that the metaphorical rug can be pulled from under your feet quite quick at any point. It takes you into some pretty, not great places.
The silence coming out of Buckingham Palace right now is not the silence of calm. It is the silence before an earthquake. And if you've been following the Sussex saga, you already know that when the royal family goes truly quiet, something enormous is about to break the surface. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the most explosive royal confrontation in modern history. Prince William has officially drawn a line in the sand. He is not whispering anymore. He is not hinting through palace insiders or letting tabloids carry his message on his behalf. He has gone fully constitutional. He has activated legal machinery that has not been used publicly in decades. And the DNA results, the very evidence that was supposed to end this war once and for all, have somehow made everything 10 times worse than it was before. Stay with me, because before this video is over, you are going to have to ask yourself a very serious question. Is Prince William defending the sacred institution he was born to lead? Or is this something far more personal, a brother's reckoning dressed up in royal protocol? The document that started everything. Let's go back to where this particular chapter began. Prince Harry's legal team delivered a 72-page dossier directly to Clarence House. 72 pages. That is not a letter. That is not a plea. That is a legal arsenal, carefully loaded, methodically organized, and deliberately aimed at the heart of the monarchy's objections. Inside that dossier, according to multiple sources close to the process, was everything Harry's team believed they needed to settle this dispute permanently. A genetic paternity test from a California lab confirming Harry as the biological father of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. A sworn affidavit from Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, laying out her pregnancy timeline in precise, documented detail from 2018 through 2019. Ultrasound records from a Beverly Hills obstetrician. Even a notarized statement from a staff member at Portland Hospital, the London facility where Archie was officially registered as having been born. Every page, sources say, was designed to scream legitimacy. The goal was straightforward, though the stakes were anything but: restore Archie and Lilibet as formally recognized members of the royal family. Reopen the doors of the monarchy that had quietly but firmly been closed on them. Reinstate the titles, the privileges, the protections. After years of life in Montecito, under the weight of isolation, relentless public scrutiny, and the slow unraveling of the life they had tried to build, Harry wanted his children brought back into the fold they were born into. Insiders say he had been desperate, genuinely desperate, to return to the UK, that his life in America had begun crumbling under pressures that went far beyond anything the public could see from the outside. The empire he and Meghan had built on the strength of their royal brand was fracturing, and he needed the monarchy more than he had ever wanted to admit. Here is precisely where the story turns. When that 72-page file landed on Prince William's desk, his response was not the emotional, wounded reaction of a grieving brother. It was the calculated, methodical, ice-cold response of a future king who had already decided where his duty lay. According to palace insiders, he did not hesitate. He did not reach for the phone to call Harry. He did not dispatch a trusted intermediary to arrange a private conversation. He reassembled what insiders are calling the Sovereign Succession Security Council, a body of senior legal minds, intelligence officials, and royal archivists whose entire purpose is to investigate lineage integrity whenever the monarchy's bloodlines are called into question. Their first move was swift and brutal. Within hours, William's office issued what is now being described as a royal freeze on Archie's reintegration attempt. The stated reason: serious irregularities and contradictions in the submitted evidence. But what exactly were those irregularities? That is where this story gets truly, breathtakingly explosive. The silent freeze from London. As the implications of Project Mirror began to surface, the reaction inside London was not explosive or emotional. It was procedural. Within days of the January 18, 2026 documentation coming to light, Prince William convened a closed session with the Royal Household Financial Office. There were no public statements and no visible signs of panic. What followed was far more controlled. The first step was containment. All Windsor-linked assets that were co-managed with Prince Harry, including trademarks, licensing streams, and deferred royalty agreements, were placed under independent escrow review. The objective was simple. Nothing tied to the royal institution would be liquidated, transferred, or leveraged without scrutiny. At the same time, a $7,800,000 savings portfolio previously accessible through joint structures was frozen by court order. The 33-acre Archwell estate in Gloucestershire was flagged for asset review. These were not symbolic gestures, they were financial breaks. The timing mattered. Project Mirror depended on movement. Relocation requires liquidity, predictable cash flow, and control over branding rights. By initiating escrow protections and asset freezes in mid-February 2026, William effectively slowed the machinery that would have supported a permanent shift to Doha. But the financial review did not stop at asset containment. Forensic filings submitted to the California Superior Court revealed $2,300,000 in personal expenditures between 2022 and 2025 on joint credit lines. The itemized records included $480,000 in high-end fashion purchases from Hermes, Dior, and Elie Saab. There was $670,000 allocated to private aviation, including solo flights to Abu Dhabi and Nice. Another $310,000 was directed toward image consulting and media training services. The very force Harry had spent years battling sensed an opening. Morning headlines were sharp and relentless. Cryptic confession, trouble in paradise, freedom or regret. The Sussex fairy tale unravels. The tone wasn't speculative, it was surgical. And yet, amid the chaos, something unexpected surfaced. According to a close friend, Harry didn't look angry in the aftermath. He looked lighter, almost relieved. As if saying the words out loud, even partially, had lifted a weight he'd been carrying for years. That friend described it as watching a man finally admit, if only to himself, that this wasn't the life he believed he was choosing back then. That the promise of freedom came bundled with conditions he didn't fully see at the time. And once that realization settles in, it doesn't stay quiet for long. Because when someone stops apologizing for their truth, the story doesn't reset. It shifts. And the people who built everything around the old version are forced to decide what matters more, protecting the image or confronting what happens when the man at the center no longer agrees to play along. But as the realization settles in, it doesn't stay quiet for long. So, will Harry finally break free, or will the old story crush him? Stay glued. The silence that spoke loudest. In the hours after the King's announcement, the Sussex camp released a two-line statement through the Archwell Foundation. It said the Duke and Duchess of Sussex remained committed to their humanitarian work. That was it. No outrage, no accusations, no press conference, just silence wrapped in 12 careful words. And that silence, controlled, deliberate, impossibly restrained, told the real story. Because those who know Meghan Markle know she does not do silence by accident. Every word she releases, every image she puts into the world, is calculated with precision. So when she chose stillness, for the first time in years, he didn't step back. Instead, he responded with 6 words that changed the tone of the room entirely. I didn't destroy anything. I just told the truth. Nothing more. Insiders say the silence that followed was immediate and heavy, the kind that feels louder than shouting. Then Meghan stormed out, slamming the door so hard it reportedly shook the chandelier. But the real explosion wasn't confined to that house. It was already spreading far beyond it. Online, the reaction was instant and unforgiving. Royal watchers slowed the footage down, frame by frame. TikTok analysts dissected his posture, his pauses, and the way his voice softened at certain moments. YouTube channels rushed out breakdowns within hours. Twitter threads stretched endlessly, all circling the same conclusion. Harry wasn't performing anymore. He was cracking. Even the British press, these numbers were not presented as scandal. They were presented as a pattern. Harry's legal team, led by Miles Armitage, cross-referenced American Express and HSBC statements with Archwell corporate logs. The allegation was that certain personal expenses had been categorized under Foundation-related descriptions. Around the same time, redacted documentation from the United States Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network referenced 2 Cayman Islands accounts linked to Echo Clover Limited, an entity structured through the British Virgin Islands. Between August and December 2025, approximately $890,000 in transfers were reportedly received from Dubai-based event organizers. When the palace activated the 2023 Crown Transparency Statute and forwarded documentation to the United Kingdom's Serious Fraud Office, the financial dimension of the custody dispute expanded into something more systemic. Meanwhile, internal morale at Archwell faltered. Senior staff members, including the Director of Brand Partnerships and the Deputy Legal Counsel, resigned within 24 hours of the disclosures. Industry partners such as Spotify and Penguin Random House were reported to be reassessing 2026 projects amid concerns about reputational exposure. In London, the strategy remained consistent: remove uncertainty, stabilize institutional assets, ensure that no financial channel connected to the monarchy could be redirected toward an overseas restructuring of custodial control. The $37 million framework outlined in Project Mirror may have been ambitious, but ambition requires fuel. By the morning of February 14, 2026, much of that fuel had been placed under lock and review. What appeared to be a private marital breakdown was now intertwined with escrow notices, statutory triggers, and international compliance protocols. The relocation plan had not yet moved forward, but the infrastructure supporting it was steadily being restrained. One account, one property, one trademark at a time. And now, as every account, property, and trademark quietly tightened, did Harry's choice of fatherhood secretly ignite a silent royal rebellion? Stay glued. The night. The crown trembled. The study at Windsor Castle was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock, a sound that now felt unbearably loud. Prince William sat at his desk, staring at a sealed folder that had just been delivered by a senior aide who couldn't quite meet his eyes. The folder's weight seemed to press down on him, heavy with truths that could alter lives. His hand trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Across the room, Kate stood near the window, her arms folded, her face pale but composed. "You don't have to face this alone," she whispered. But both knew the truth. Some burdens were his alone to carry. He opened the folder. Line after line, the words carved themselves into his chest. Each sentence felt like a blow. The air seemed to thin. By the time he reached the final page, his heart had gone cold. What he had feared most had been confirmed. Someone close to him, someone he trusted completely, had betrayed the royal family in a way that could never be undone. This wasn't about politics or scandal. It was personal, devastatingly personal. William leaned back in his chair, staring blankly ahead. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. But denial couldn't rewrite what was written. The proof was there, undeniable, irreversible. Kate stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent. "What does it say?" He met her gaze, his eyes clouded with pain. "It's the end of something sacred," he said quietly. The room seemed to shrink around them. Even the air felt heavy, as though the old castle itself understood the gravity of what had been lost. Within minutes, whispers turned into movement. Doors were locked. Can the palace manage the diplomatic and media dimensions of a restoration without it appearing like a reversal that undermines Charles's authority? And underneath all of those questions, the deepest one: can a family this fractured, this publicly torn apart, this thoroughly exposed to global scrutiny, can they find something private enough, real enough, and strong enough to hold? Royal analysts are watching 3 specific signals for clues about where this is heading. First, whether Harry makes any further public references to the palace, and whether those references are critical or conciliatory in tone. Second, whether King Charles makes any public statement, however oblique, about the possibility of reviewing the November decisions. And third, and perhaps most tellingly, William. If the Prince of Wales is seen publicly, anywhere, in any context, in Harry's company, the story resets entirely. The cameras will be watching. The world will be watching. And somewhere between Montecito and Buckingham Palace, 2 brothers and their father are navigating something that no constitutional precedent, no royal protocol, no PR strategy can fully prepare them for. The oldest and most difficult thing there is, the slow, uncertain, deeply human work of finding the audit findings. The official audit report, compiled by a joint UK-US commission and reviewed by the Charity Commission and IRS, was released within the hour, and its findings were damning. It confirmed multiple violations that had already surfaced in leaks and internal royal investigation documents. Archwell had misrepresented donor funds through unreported consulting fees tied to Meghan's personal brand advisors. Money that donors thought was going to charitable causes was actually paying for Meghan's personal team. Multiple international travel events were wrongly classified as humanitarian missions when they were actually sponsored content negotiations or luxury appearances. Is his son not performing royalty reluctantly, but genuinely, freely choosing to belong to the family that has always, in its complicated and deeply imperfect way, loved him? Whether Harry's private approach to the palace represents that genuine choice is the question Charles is sitting with right now. And it is the question that will define what comes next, what happens next. So here we are, at the edge of a moment that could rewrite royal history or collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The variables are extraordinary in their complexity. Can Harry accept a reinstated role that comes with real obligations? Can Meghan genuinely support that without it unraveling what she has spent years building? Can William and Harry find their way back to something that resembles brotherhood? Senior advisors were called in, their faces grave as they gathered in the same study. William placed the documents on the table. No one spoke at first. They simply read in stunned silence. One by one, their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, sorrow. "It's true," William said, his voice low and steady. "There's no mistake." A long silence followed. "What do we do now?" an advisor finally asked. William drew a slow breath. "We protect what's left," he replied. "The truth stays here. The world is not ready." As the hours dragged on, the pain refused to fade. Memories of laughter and loyalty now felt hollow. William thought of his children and how one day they might learn that even love and loyalty could be shattered, that being royal did not shield one from heartbreak. When dusk settled, he stepped outside into the gardens. The air was cool, the ground damp from morning rain. He stopped beneath the old oak tree his mother had loved and whispered, "It's happening again." In that quiet, he could almost hear her voice, gentle, steadfast, reminding him that true strength wasn't silence, but endurance. By nightfall, Windsor's windows glowed softly against the dark sky. Inside, the family spoke in hushed tones, while beyond the palace gates, reporters waited in the rain, sensing that something had cracked behind those walls. Back in his study, William ran his hand over the letter one last time before locking it away. As midnight struck, he gazed through the window at the cold, distant stars. The burden was his alone now, the secret, the sorrow, the duty to protect what remained. And though the world outside slept, unaware, something within those ancient walls had changed forever. And what truth could be so devastating that even a future king must guard it in silence? The answer hides behind Windsor's glowing gates. The moment Harry chose fatherhood over rank. By the time the financial restraints tightened in mid-February 2026, the battle was no longer abstract for Prince Harry.
After many, many years of lies being told about me and my family, there comes a point where, again, going back to the relationship between certain members of the family and the tabloid press.
What had begun as legal filings and asset reviews became intensely personal the moment Project Mirror was read into the court record at the Santa Barbara Family Law Courthouse. Until then, he had heard fragments, strategic discussions, legal language, defensive explanations. But seeing the structure laid out in dated pages, January 18, 2026, stamped across the header, shifted something inside him. The 42-page manual was not theoretical. It outlined timelines, educational transitions, jurisdictional shifts, and media positioning. Enrollment documents for a bespoke international school in Doha had been drafted. Court-appointed forensic experts later testified that those files had been accessed repeatedly under Meghan Markle's administrative login. There were references to dual citizenship sponsorship pathways and residency sequencing. To legal observers, it was a relocation strategy. To Harry, it was a map of a future he had not fully understood. More alarming were the encrypted communications introduced during preliminary review. Among them was a request sent to a Qatari legal consultant seeking clarity on sovereign custodial protections and non-extradition guarantees. That phrase alone carried weight. It implied planning beyond branding or philanthropy. It suggested anticipation of resistance. Harry had already endured years of public tension with the monarchy, but this was different. The question before him was not reputation. It was accessible. If relocation proceeded under sovereign sponsorship in Qatar, enforcement of custodial rights could become complex under international frameworks. Even with the protections of the Windsor, California Reciprocal Accord of 2024, cross-border jurisdiction is never simple once residency changes. On February 16, 2026, as arguments intensified, Harry's legal team filed a motion requesting independent psychological evaluations for both parents. Judging by what followed, the answer from Montecito was immediate and unforgiving. If Harry's confession at the California Wellness Summit sent shockwaves through the Sussex world, Meghan's reaction turned those tremors into something far more destructive. Within minutes of the clip going viral, it exploded across platforms. Millions of views, endless replays, comment sections filling faster than any team could contain. The phrase, "freedom can look like a cage," took on a life of its own, repeated, dissected, and weaponized. Insiders say Meghan went straight into crisis mode. Phones rang without pause. Advisors scrambled. Messages were fired off in every direction. One source described the atmosphere inside the Montecito mansion as pure chaos. Meghan pacing across marble floors, barefoot, phone locked in her hand, voice raised, instructions coming fast and sharp. "Get it taken down! Call everyone! Stop this now!" But there was nothing left to stop, because those words were already out there, burned into the internet's memory. No retraction could erase them. No clarification could soften them. No carefully crafted joint statement could put them back in the bottle. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted. The issue was no longer what Harry said. It was the realization that he said it at all, and that once a man starts speaking without permission, silence becomes impossible to restore. Now, because those words are out forever, do you think Harry will keep breaking silence? Or will the story finally spiral beyond control? The Archwell collapse. As the Crown Service Foundation soared, Archwell's decline accelerated. 3 major sponsors quietly withdrew funding by the end of January. Meanwhile, Prince Harry's request for a formal audience with King Charles remained unanswered. According to insiders, his tone had shifted from assertive to increasingly desperate. Meghan's team reportedly attempted to pitch a new docu-series to Amazon Prime, framing it as a global citizen's quest for justice. It was rejected. "The brand fatigue is real," said one Hollywood agent. "They're losing credibility on both sides of the Atlantic." The joint regulatory audit, in a historic first. The Charity Commission for England and Wales, in coordination with the Internal Revenue Service, the illusion collapses. And once that illusion cracks, it can't be reconstructed. That's the fear quietly driving everything behind the scenes. Because Harry is no longer just sharing emotions. He's revealing patterns, control, the slow erosion of identity, the hidden cost of love when it becomes entangled with power, cameras, and contracts. Each sentence now feels loaded. Each pause feels deliberate, like a man checking whether he's still allowed to exist outside the role he's been given. And the most unsettling part is where this is happening. Not in a private diary, not in therapy, but in public, where nothing can be pulled back once it lands. Every time Harry speaks, it sounds less like reflection and more like a test, a quiet experiment to see how far he can go before the walls close in again. The filing cited stress records from 2019 to 2022 and concerns raised during mediation. It was not framed as an attack, it was framed as a precaution. 2 days earlier, on February 14th, the court had already been informed of financial freezes and escrow reviews initiated in London. The legal pressure was mounting from multiple directions. When Justice Maya Caldwell issued an emergency order requiring the children's passports to be surrendered to a neutral third party and mandated monitored digital communication between the children and their mother pending further review, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. This was no longer a contest of narratives. It was judicial containment. Witnesses later described Harry sitting unusually still as the metadata surrounding Project Mirror was explained in detail. 14 separate accesses to school enrollment forms within a single week. Flight logs documenting round trips between Van Nuys and Doha in late 2025. References to media exclusivity clauses embedded within the broader financial structure. For years he had defended the decisions that distanced him from the institution of his birth. He had argued for independence, for autonomy, for a life outside inherited expectation. Yet in that courtroom, faced with the possibility of losing day-to-day proximity to his children under a jurisdictional shift, the calculation changed. That evening, as discussions continued behind closed doors, Harry drafted a personal statement. It would not be signed as Duke of Sussex. It would not carry the styling of Prince. Instead, he chose his birth name, Henry Charles Albert David. The choice was quiet but deliberate. It signaled not a return to palace life, and not allegiance to any faction, but a narrowing of identity. He was no longer positioning himself between institution and spouse. He was positioning himself between risk and his children. The financial mechanisms had been restrained. The relocation infrastructure was under scrutiny. But the emotional turning point occurred in that sealed courtroom in Santa Barbara, where titles felt distant, and the only role that mattered was father. So did he finally choose his children over legacy? Or was this courtroom silence just another strategic move in a hidden royal battle? Stay tuned. The day the strategy unraveled. As diplomatic reviews unfolded and institutional safeguards tightened across the Atlantic, all eyes returned to Santa Barbara. The hearings scheduled between February 16th and February 18th, 2026, would determine whether the growing web of documents, flight logs, and financial disclosures amounted to precaution or proof. By the morning of February 16th, the Santa Barbara Family Law Courthouse felt less like a local courtroom and more like the center of an international reckoning. Inside, the tone was clinical. Court-appointed forensic specialists presented the digital trail connected to Project Mirror. Metadata timelines were displayed with precision. The January 18, 2026 document was dissected line by line. Access logs showed repeated reviews of enrollment drafts for the bespoke school in Doha. Aviation records confirmed round trips between Van Nuys and Qatar during late 2025. Communications referencing sovereign custodial assurances were entered into the record. Each detail, taken alone, might have been defensible. Together, they formed a pattern that was difficult to dismiss as hypothetical planning. Then, the financial layer was added. Statements submitted earlier by Harry's legal team resurfaced in full. The court examined the $2,300,000 in personal expenditures between 2020 and 2025, including $480,000 in luxury fashion purchases and $670,000 spent on private aviation. Transfers totaling $1,100,000 to the United Arab Emirates were scrutinized alongside documentation connected to Cayman Islands accounts linked to Echo Clover Limited. Joint investigations by the United Kingdom Charities Commission and the United States Office of Tax-Exempt Organization Review placed potential misappropriation estimates between $2,700,000 and $4,400,000. Affidavits from former Archwell staff members were introduced. Some alleged that research and development costs tied to Project Mirror had been categorized internally under broader outreach initiatives. The testimony did not speculate on motive. It focused on the process, the classification of expenses, the sequence of approvals, the timing of transfers. By February 17th, the courtroom dynamic had shifted noticeably. What began as a custody renegotiation had evolved into a layered examination of intent, oversight, and jurisdiction. Meghan's legal team, led by Sher Tilden, maintained that Project Mirror represented exploratory brand planning. They argued that interest in the Middle East aligned with global expansion, not custodial evasion. But the combination of relocation detail, financial routing, and timing relative to the February 11th agreement complicated that defense. Justice Maya Caldwell listened without visible reaction. On February 18th, she delivered her ruling. The February 11th custodial framework would remain in force as the permanent structure governing the children's lives. Any relocation attempt without mutual written consent would require a $5 million bond. Meghan Markle was ordered to reimburse $1,300,000 to the frozen joint estate within 90 days for misallocated foundation funds. The Archwell Foundation itself was directed toward dissolution, with remaining assets frozen pending distribution under charitable trust law. Perhaps most consequential was the restriction placed on commercial use of institutional identifiers. For a period of 10 years, no new entity, trademark, or media product could incorporate the terms Arch, Windsor, Sussex, or Lily in a commercial context linked to the dispute. Should ancient royal birth laws be modernized to reflect how families are built today? And the biggest question of all, is this justice, or is this the crown protecting itself at the expense of its own blood? This conversation belongs to everyone watching, not only to the people inside those palace walls. Hit like if you believe this story deserves serious coverage rather than being dismissed as celebrity gossip. Subscribe because this saga is nowhere near its final chapter. And when the next development breaks, you will want to be here for it. Share this video with someone who thinks the royal family is just entertainment. Because what is happening right now is constitutional history unfolding before our eyes. The bloodline files may have been sealed, but the story has only just begun.